live in Florida, and this incident happened about 3 weeks after Hurricane Irma, so not that long ago. Back in July, my ex and I had just finished the divorce, and I moved into a gated neighborhood where every house was rented out by the same retail company and landlords. It's a very small neighborhood with about 15 houses tops. All 15 houses are bordered around a man-made lake, with the backyards facing the lake. No one really has a fenced backyard. When you walk out of your back door, you see the lake in front of you and your neighbor's backyards on each side of you. Everyone in the neighborhood seemed very close. Someone was always hosting a family-friendly party or barbecue, or having people over to watch sports. I was, and am, still depressed about my divorce, so I never partook in these social gatherings. The only person I got to know was my next-door neighbor, Steve, an active Navy soldier with a huge love of guns. Steve is the true hero in this nightmare. My daughter Alice is 4 years old, and I get her every weekend. Alice's bedroom window faces the backyard towards the lake. I spoil that girl to death. She truly means everything, and I count down the days to the weekend every week just to be with her. That's why I was upset when Irma came, and I had to go almost 3 weeks without seeing her. This weekend, before the storm, she was with her mum. Then on top of that, the weekend after, she had to be with her mum because my power was still out. No AC in Florida is miserable. The humidity was so bad that week that I slept in my daughter's room the whole week because she had the only room with a window that faced the lake. I opened the window, exposing just the window screen so the wind from the lake could cool the room as much as possible while I slept. Eventually the power comes back and Alice starts visiting me again like normal. That was when the nightmares started. My daughter would complain about the singing lady and how she doesn't like her anymore. I thought maybe she was referring to one of my ex's friends or one of the teachers at her school. Maybe there was a teacher at her school that sang to the kids that she didn't like. That Saturday night, Alice woke up in the middle of the night screaming bloody murder. I ran into her room and turned on the light and found her hiding under her covers. I asked her what was wrong, and all she could do was point to an empty corner of her room and say, "Look, look." There was nothing there. She was acting as if she saw a ghost. After I calmed her down, she started to talk about the singing lady again. "Please tell the singing lady not to come back. Please, Daddy. Make her go away." Obviously, she's having nightmares, right? I showed her there was nothing in the closet and nothing under the bed, and that there was nothing to be afraid of. She calmed down and went back to sleep. I went back to my room and quickly fell back asleep. It couldn't have been more than 20 minutes before Alice comes running into my room screaming, "She's back! She's back!" Alice absolutely refused to go back to her room, so I let her sleep with me. The next morning, Sunday morning, I took Alice out for breakfast, and we stopped by Target to pick up a baby monitor. I haven't used one since her mum and I were still married, but I wanted to easily be able to hear her if or when she started having these nightmares again, so I could respond quicker. After I set them up, I showed Alice how they worked to give her some assurance that I could hear her and she was safe. That night, she slept soundly and didn't make a peep all night. The following weekend, Alice had to stay with her mother again because she caught a stomach virus from one of her little friends at school. It was Saturday night and I was sound asleep in my bed. Around 2 a.m. is when I heard it. A woman's voice, humming a nursery rhyme through the baby monitor. The humming, or soft singing, got louder and clearer as the voice got closer to the monitor. I wasn't dreaming. I could hear a woman softly singing lullabies in my daughter's bedroom. I had never been so scared and dumbfounded in my life. When I heard the voice, all I could say to myself was, "You have to be kidding me. My daughter was right. There's a ghost in my house." I was feeling a mixture of pure terror and disbelief. Then the voice spoke out. "Alice, sweetie, are you awake?" Adrenaline shot through my veins. I jumped out of bed and locked my bedroom door. I picked up my cell and called Steve from next door. He didn't waste a second. As soon as I got off the phone with him, I heard him storm out of his back door screaming, "Don't you move!" I ran outside and found him aiming his shotgun at a woman crouched outside my daughter's window, the one I had left open after Irma and never closed. Steve quickly dropped his guard when he realized the woman. It was Jean, the neighborhood maintenance woman. Steve's wife came running out after him and confirmed it was her. Jean played dumb, said she was not singing, and didn't even know my daughter's name. She said she was near my daughter's window because she was doing her weekly patrol for gators and thought she saw one approach our house from the lake. Bull crap. That bitch was singing, and she called out to my daughter by name. Yes, it's true that there have been a few gators spotted around the neighborhood, and yes, part of Jean's job was to patrol the lake at night every now and then. But 2 a.m.? I obviously knew it was bullcrap, and even though neither Steve or his wife called her out on it, I could tell from the look on their faces that they didn't believe her either. The next morning, I went over to Steve's house to thank him and tell him exactly what happened. He told me Jean and her husband had been known to be a little cuckoo, but this was by far the craziest thing to happen so far. Steve helped me install metal bars on Alice's window that afternoon. Yeah, I'm moving. I've already made up my mind. I can't sleep knowing that lady is part of the norm in this community. I mean, how the hell did she know my daughter's name? She must have gotten Alice to talk to her a few times before she got scary for her. Alice did say she didn't like her, quote, anymore. Back in 2008, I was a student planning to go to university and needed some extracurricular stuff I could put on my entry applications. As most UK students know, one of the best to have on there is the Duke of Edinburgh Award. As part of this award, you have to embark on an orienteering expedition, basically a long trek through woodland and rural villages, following nothing but a map and compass, no GPS allowed. It's a teamwork experience, and you camp and overcome hurdles together, etc. Anyway, I was out of shape at the time, and so my uncle volunteered to take me out to the middle of nowhere to get some ideas of what orienteering was like. We didn't stay overnight, like what I would have to do during the real thing, but we hiked maybe 10 miles through woods in a small village in pretty abysmal weather. By the end of the journey, we were soaked to the bone and pretty miserable, looking forward to getting back to the car and heading home. For the last part of the journey, we were on a dirt trail heading uphill with bushes and trees either side. We were marching onward in silence at this point, when all of a sudden there was a rustling in the foliage to our left. From behind a large bush stepped an old man in a black suit with a red bow tie and dress shoes. He looked late 70s or early 80s, very pale, liver spots dotting his face, and a grey-white comb-over. I was instantly weirded out. Who dresses like that to go into the woods? The instant thought seeing a guy his age out there in those clothes, in those weather conditions was, this guy has lost his marbles. There was something else that took me an extra moment to notice though that puzzled me. The guy was bone dry, didn't even have mud on his shoes. We stopped in our tracks and just stared at the man for a moment, who appeared to be frozen and shocked at seeing us. My uncle made the first move, taking a step towards him, asking if he was all right. The old man continued to stare for a moment, not moving even a twitch, then became suddenly very animated. It was like he suddenly snapped out of a trance. He started flailing his arms wildly, saying something awful had happened, that a good friend of his needed help. He began walking backwards into the woods, motioning for us to follow him, which we did. We started off at a brisk walk, then escalated to running as we struggled to keep up with the old man. After maybe a minute, he disappeared ahead of us, but we could hear him, so we continued to follow the noise until we reached a huge slope. We stopped at the edge and looked down to see the old man standing at the bottom, motioning us, pleading with us to follow him. I remember looking down, and the slope was probably a 40-degree angle, spanning for perhaps 50 feet or more, and slick with mud. It looks like an accident waiting to happen, especially given that there are no shrubs or roots to hold onto or anything. I remember looking down at the old man on the other side of the slope and wondering, how the heck did he cross that so quickly and so cleanly? I mean, at that distance it's hard to see fine detail clearly, but I swear he did not appear to be wet or muddy at all. My uncle and I looked at each other, and I saw that he was getting as weirded out as I was. Despite my feelings, I made a step towards the edge and was going to try and make my way down when my uncle grabbed me firmly by the arm and pulled me back. Under his breath he said, "Something's wrong here." We took a few steps back from the edge at this point, and the old man at the bottom started getting irate. He began pleading with us again to come down the slope, telling us he needed our help. His friend was in trouble. My uncle shouted down to the old man that we would head back to our car and call emergency services for him, that professional help would be on its way soon, and that they would have all the tools to help him, etc. The old man suddenly got furious. He began jumping up and down, demanding that we come down the slope right now, or there would be hell to pay. His voice had changed drastically. He was practically growling his words, his hands bunched up into fists, pounding his knees like an angry toddler throwing a tantrum. I've never seen a grown adult fly into such a rage in my life. His eyes looked like they were on the verge of bursting out of their sockets. His skin went from pale to red in almost an instant. We began to hurriedly make our way back the way we came, his demands and threats getting less audible as we got closer to the trail. Once on the trail, we practically power marched the remaining quarter mile or so to the car. All the while, my uncle was on the phone to the emergency services, explaining to them that there was a possibly mentally ill old man wandering the trail. We were ordered to get to our car and await the police so we could show them where we had encountered him. About an hour later, we met 4 officers, 2 of whom had dogs with them and packs of supplies like first aid, emergency blankets, etc. We lead them to the exact spot and then pointed the 2 officers with dogs in the direction he led us through the bushes. The search lasted all weekend, but there was no trace of the old man. Officers said the only trail they could pick up had been mine and my uncle's. They didn't find any footprints or anything belonging to the old man we encountered. One of my weirdest experiences to date. This happened about 2 years ago while I was in university, working on my degree in biology. I had signed up for a trip to gather samples for an experiment some students in the ecology department were going to run. It required a collection of samples from several sites, so they recruited biology, ecology, and forestry majors to help them complete the sampling in a shorter period. The area my group was to take samples from was a few hours from my uni in the Pacific Northwest. There are 9 of us in my group, 8 students and a supervising professor. We got to the campsite in the late evening and set up our tents. One of the other students had brought a big container of split pea soup from home and was sharing it with the others on the trip. I don't really care for split pea soup, so I declined the offer. Everyone had some except me, one other student, and the professor. Come the next morning, the 5 students who had eaten the soup weren't in the best shape. They were in the grips of some gnarly food poisoning, and were in no shape to hike for 8 or 9 hours to collect the samples we needed. The professor who was supervising us originally had some rules such as people travel in groups of at least 2, and we had to return to camp by nightfall. Now those rules were tossed out to make sure we kept to our timetable and collected all of the required samples. We were just told to, quote, do your best to complete the work assignment as long as you can do it safely. That morning, I set out for a long day of hiking. After a mile or so, I ran into a stream I was supposed to follow. I needed to travel about 4 miles upstream, stopping every quarter mile to collect samples of water and soil. This meant I had to hustle to get back before dark. Halfway through the day, I realized that wasn't going to happen. About 2 miles into my hike, I stopped for lunch, sitting on a log overlooking the stream. The scene was really peaceful until I smelled cigarettes. It wasn't the smell of a cigarette being smoked, more the musty smell of a heavy smoker's car, where cigarette butts had been left to ferment for weeks on end. I looked around but couldn't see anyone. I just assumed that the wind had blown the scent of some hunter or hiker over to me. But minutes later, the smell hadn't faded. The vegetation in the area wasn't that thick, but there was still a lot of places for someone to duck behind a tree or bush. I was unnerved that someone was apparently staying close enough to me for me to smell them for this long without so much as a word. I quickly packed up the trash from my lunch and continued upstream. The musty cigarette smell went away for the next few hours. It wasn't until I arrived at my last sample location, late into dusk, that I smelled it again. The woods were getting really dim by this point. Looking back on it, it was a really stupid idea to stay out so late, as just hiking back to camp in the dark would be pretty dangerous, even without a cigarette-smoking stalker. Having just put the collection tubes in my bag, I shined my flashlight around the darkening woods, looking for whoever was giving off the smell. I didn't see anything that caught my attention. It would actually be more correct to say I saw too many things in the dim light that might have been a head sticking out from behind a tree, or someone crouched low in the foliage. I didn't like the idea of being in the dark woods with a stranger who, for the second time, was lurking near me without revealing themselves. So I began to double time it back down the stream. I made much better time on my way back, even though it was dark, because I didn't have to stop to take any samples. Even so, I didn't get back to camp till a bit before 10. I was the last one to get back, and everyone but the professor was already asleep. I didn't mention the cigarette smell to the professor because he seemed tired as it was, and he headed to his bed in the RV soon after I got back. I headed to my tent soon after that. At some point in the night, I woke up needing to pee. I decided to head into the woods to do my business, as I knew some of the other students were still feeling ill and needed the RV toilet for more urgent matters than just having to take a leak. I walked about 100 feet into the woods, found a tree, and did what I needed to. As I turned to go back to camp, something caught my eye. Somewhere off in the woods, there was a tiny red glow. I was confused as to what it was until it flared momentarily, and I realized it was the cherry of a cigarette. I stood there for a while, watching the red ember glow, fade, then move slightly closer to the ground, as whoever was smoking would take it out of their mouth. Not being able to see the person, I assumed they were watching the camp. I don't know if they had seen me make my way into the woods or not, as the fire had been doused and the moon was only half full, so there wasn't very much light. I made my way slowly back to camp, as quietly as I could, and entered the RV to wake up the professor. I told him about the person smoking in the woods, and about the smell of cigarettes earlier that day. However, when we got outside the RV, the ember from the cigarette was gone. My professor woke the other students who hadn't come down with food poisoning, and we took turns watching over the camp. I didn't see or smell anything else when I was on guard duty, and went to sleep when the professor woke up for his turn. In the morning, the professor and the other students and I went to where I guessed the smoker had been standing the night before, and sure enough, we found about 10 cigarette butts on the ground next to a tree. The tree itself looked like someone had been twisting and stabbing a knife or other sharp object into it, as the bark and the outer layers of wood had been damaged and chipped away. The professor decided that the group should head back that day, even though we hadn't collected all the samples we were assigned, to be on the safe side. We packed up camp and drove down the thin dirt trail without incident. The second we got onto the paved highway though, a white paneled van pulled out of a clearing just off the shoulder and began following us. This van stayed behind us all the way back, pulling off the highway when we did, taking the same surface streets that we did, and only stopped following us when we turned onto the road leading to our university campus. Everyone was freaked out by this. But it was around 9 at night on a weekend, so the security office on campus was closed. We decided to unload the RV and call it a night, as the van hadn't followed us onto campus. I offered to help the professor catalogue and store the collection tubes from our trip, so it was another couple of hours before I left the biological sciences building and started heading towards the dorm building I lived in. I stepped out into the cool air night and began walking. My professor had left the building in the other direction to get to his car and drive home. It was a couple of dozen feet outside of the building, which was now locked, when I was hit with a musty smell of old cigarettes. I looked around, and about 25 yards away in the darkness, off of the footpath, I saw the cherry of a cigarette smoldering away. I was pretty scared at this point, but hoped it was only a student or some faculty staying late having a smoke. I couldn't completely convince myself of this, as the musty cigarette smell was the same as what I smelled in the woods the previous night. I started down the footpath and soon passed whoever was smoking. 100 feet or so later, I looked over my shoulder and saw the cigarette cherry bobbing in the darkness. The smoker was following me. This creeped me out a bit more, but I still held it together. That is, until I rounded a small stand of trees and saw a white paneled van parked alone in a parking lot. I took off at a sprint towards my dorm building. I looked over my shoulder a few steps into my run and saw the cherry of the cigarette fall to the ground and a dark shape beginning to move after me. I didn't look back again, but I could hear someone running in the grass off of the footpath. I got to the entrance to my dorm building and frantically waved my keycard in front of the card reader that controlled the door lock. As soon as I hear the soft beep, I open the door, jump through the doorway and shut the door quickly. I stopped and peered through the glass door. I saw the dark shape stop just short of the lit pathway. I just watched for a minute or two, then I saw the spark of a lighter. The light is just barely bright enough to illuminate a shaggy beard and brim of a baseball cap before it disappeared and was replaced with the red glow of a cigarette. I turned and headed up the stairs to my dorm room. By the time I get to my window overlooking the same yard I had just run through, there is no trace of a dark figure or a cigarette cherry. I told the professor what happened about a week later when I saw him next. He said he would alert campus security to watch out for the white paneled van. After that, I didn't see that white paneled van again, or smelled that musty cigarette smell, and I hope I never do. It was the summer of 2014, I believe. I was a sophomore going into my junior year of college, and I wanted to be like everyone else and have a job during the summer so I can have some money in my pocket. My brother was a pharmacy technician at one of the biggest stores in New Jersey, and he was damn good at it, which helped me out when I applied to his store to be a stocker. I got rejected for some reason, but when they found out that I was related to their best employee, they gave me a shot. When I got hired, we had an agreement that they were going to keep me in the daytime for a bit and then put me into night shift. I asked for night shift because I was a gamer and all we do is stay up all night, and I thought, hell, why not benefit off my insomnia? After working for a bit, I was told today was the day that I would get trained in a bit of night shift duties so I can be transitioned into the night shift, and I was pretty excited. It went from 8 to midnight, and I asked my manager if they're training me tonight, and he changed his mind. The night shift manager didn't show up today because he got sick, so they had to postpone it. So I walked home in defeat, absolutely exhausted because that job destroyed me, and I just couldn't wait to get home and sleep. The next day I was awoken to my mother barging into my room. I was still drowsy but understood exactly what she said to me. "Hey, your store got shot up." And I thought I was dreaming. I looked at her phone and saw the news article that stated that, indeed, a shootout did occur at the store I worked at. I tried to get in contact with my manager and got no response, so I headed to work. It was like a scene from CSI or something. Yellow tape outside the store. A security guard with a vest and gun ushered me in after I flashed my company's logo on my shirt. It was insane. Once I got in, I got the whole story from my manager. After I left, a man came in and walked around the store and told customers, quote, "He's going to be on the TV. He's going to be famous." He then proceeded to attack one of our armed security officers, an old man, unfortunately, and bashed him in the head. He then proceeded to grab the security guard's gun. Of course, panic ensues. Customers went upstairs to protect themselves. An employee jumped the counter and ran home, and managers hid in their office and called the cops. Unfortunately, that night, a rookie cop showed up to the scene, and as soon as he did, the gunman shot him in his own vehicle. After that, more police officers came, and once they found out that one of their own was hurt, they opened fire on the gunman. And the scariest part was, not only did this happen on the day I was supposed to be doing night shift, it happened literally 3 hours after I left. The whole thing shook up my neighborhood quite a bit. Somehow it turned into a people versus police sort of situation. A lot of people were on the side of the police, because, come on, this guy just walked in and attacked people for no reason, but a lot of others were quite on the whole, screw the police rhetoric. It got to a point where there were cops standing on the street corners, and people who worked at the store were scared to wear their uniforms outside of the store in fear of being attacked. Luckily, besides the gunman's father coming into the store and pleading with us about something, nothing came of it. And also, yes, I did do night shift for that exact same store a few years later. Not by choice. My heart always skipped a beat when I heard the sliding doors activate. This is one of my favorite personal stories since everything turned out alright, but I still get chills thinking about how many different ways the night could have gone wrong. A few years ago, my friend Jane and I took a trip to Portland, Oregon. I'm also female. We're both from the south side of Chicago, and Jane was feeling pretty jaded with the city. She was convinced everything was better on the West Coast, including the people. So we flew out to Portland and rented a car, which we named Veronica. The day before we were supposed to fly back home, we took Veronica and drove up to Aberdeen, Washington, to see Kurt Cobain's childhood home. After that, we drove down the coast sightseeing along the way. We visited Astoria, Oregon, to see the house from the Goonies, and ended the day at Cannon Beach to check out Haystack Rock. All in all, it was a pretty nice day. Once it started to get dark, we decided to head back to our hotel, which is just under 2 hours away. I knew that I needed gas, so I told Jane I would stop at the first gas station I see. Cannon Beach is a small resort-type town, a lot of little shops and restaurants, but I didn't see any gas stations. Being from the city, I'm used to seeing 2 on every corner, so I wasn't really worried. I expected to find one soon. I'm completely unfamiliar with the area, so I just keep following the GPS's instructions while talking to Jane. Next thing I know, we're not in any type of town. We're on a dark, winding road surrounded by trees. At this point, I'm getting a little worried. I pull over to the side of the road to use the GPS to search for the nearest gas station. It tells me there's one about a mile down the road. Awesome, I'll get some gas and we'll be set. So, I'm driving, and Veronica tells us that we've arrived at our destination. I pull into a completely dark and empty gas station. We're still surrounded by woods and darkness. As far as I can tell, there's nothing around for miles. According to Veronica, we have about 10 miles worth of gas, and the nearest gas station is 30 miles away. Jane and I are sitting there trying to figure out what to do when another car pulls in. I keep going about my business and don't really pay attention to the other car. I just assumed they needed gas too. Out of the corner of my eye, I see someone gesturing to me. After some hesitation, I crack the window to see what they want. There's a middle-aged man and his wife in the car. He starts asking us all kinds of questions. Need to fill up? Coming from the beach? Driving back to Portland? I keep my answers polite but short. Then, he tells us that he actually owns the gas station we're at, but doesn't make enough money to keep it open that late. He tells us that he knows of a Chevron about 3 miles away and gives us directions for it. He gave us his number and says to give him a call in case we don't make it to the Chevron. My name is Sam, the mechanic man. Let me know if you don't make it and I'll come rescue you ladies. We thank him profusely and head out. Jane is going on and on how nice that was and how that would never have happened in Chicago. I agreed. That was very nice, if odd of him. Strange that he happened to be driving past his gas station at the same time we pulled in, but whatever. I make a joke about him calling his buddy at the gas station, as if he was saying, "I'm sending 2 women your way," smiley face. We make it to the Chevron, and this kid, 18 or 19 years old, comes out to pump our gas. He asks us how we're doing, then says, "There's a lot of weirdos out tonight." Jane and I look at each other and let out a small laugh and say, "Ha, told you." I turn back to the kid and ask him what he means. He tells me this story of how his brother owes some drug dealer a ton of money and how he's hiding somewhere nearby. He's planning on kicking the hell out of him once he gets off his shift. I can tell Jane is getting uncomfortable with the building weirdness of the night, so I give the kid a good tip, wish him luck, and start driving again. At one point during our conversation, Jane calls Sam the mechanic man and leaves him a voicemail. She tells him we made it to the gas station and how much we appreciate his help. I thought the call was unnecessary, but it is what it is. A few minutes later, we're on the highway, and about 10 minutes from our hotel, Jane's phone rings and it's Sam. Again, she thanks him profusely. He asks where we're from and when we're flying home. He tells her his name is Sam Glesty and he wrote a book called Wrongly Accused. We should read it when we're on our plane ride home. This piqued my interest. "Jane, you have to look up that book to see what it's about." She Googles it. Then she goes limp and she looks like she's trying to puke. "What is it?" "He was accused of being the Green River Killer." Immediately she starts freaking out. "He has my number now." Back at the hotel, we do some more digging. Apparently, a victim of the Green River serial killer picked Sam out of a lineup. However, the real killer was caught and convicted based on DNA evidence. But around the same time in the 70s, Sam was convicted and served time for abducting and assaulting a young woman in the area we were in. The book he wrote was about all of that. We ended up stuck in Portland for 2 more days due to a snowstorm in Chicago. It was a weird, tension-filled 2 days. Considering the circumstances and weirdness of that night, things could have gone horribly wrong. I'm glad all I got out of that night was a story. I am a mother of 2 daughters and live out in the country. My husband is a welder and a really outgoing and charismatic guy, which means he has tons of friends that will periodically stop by to hang out with him. In fact, there are some friends he trusts enough to use the tools in his garage and stay at the house when he isn't home. Well, one late afternoon, he was gone when I heard someone pull up into the driveway. We have 2 dogs who were going nuts and barking at the picture window in our living room. I looked out and saw a familiar-looking blue blazer and assumed my husband's friend, Bob, was over to use something from the garage or wait for my husband to get home. He hadn't knocked on the door, so I figured they'd already talked to each other about it. No big deal. But the dogs would not stop barking and growling, which didn't seem right because they knew Bob. So I looked more closely out the window and realized that there was a man lingering near the garage, but he was not Bob. In fact, I had never seen him before. I decided to take my dogs and go outside to see who he was and what he wanted. He told me he lived down the street and knew my husband. He was very friendly and began telling me all about how he had to move out of his house because he and his wife were divorcing. He seemed quite familiar with my husband and even asked about our dog, Pepper, who had passed away a few months prior. Pepper was a very smart and protective dog and could be scary if he thought harm could come to me or my family. He didn't realize that Pepper died and really seemed genuinely apologetic about it. Meanwhile, I noticed that my dog, Shadow, still hadn't settled down around this guy. He wouldn't let him pet him, and the hair on his back was sticking straight up. He would intermittently growl during conversation too. This was really odd for him, and I was pretty confused because this guy seemed really nice. After chatting for a while, he asked for my husband's number so he could call him. That was a red flag for me, because if my husband wanted someone to have his number, he'd give it to them. So I told the man I'd give him a call right then. I called my husband in front of him, who suddenly looked a little nervous. I explained to my husband that Jim from down the street was at the house to visit him. Immediately, my husband told me to tell Jim to get off our property and never return. This scared the crap out of me because, like I said, my husband is really friendly and hospitable usually. He told me to make the man leave, and he was on his way home. I ended up making some excuse to Jim. For some reason, I just couldn't say something so mean to him after he'd just been so friendly and polite to me. And he backed up right away, suddenly quick to leave. My husband arrived home a short time later and explained that Jim was a severe addict who had been stealing from all of his neighbors' garages. His wife threw him out because of this, and he had been desperate for cash to support his habit. He was probably scoping out what he could steal from my husband's garage and seeing what obstacles, i.e. my dogs, would be in his way. To think he could have harmed me or my kids makes me furious. He seemed so nice, and I felt like an idiot for not realizing the truth. I've learned my lesson now though. If someone comes over that I don't know while my husband is out, I call him right away. Update. My husband told me tonight that Jim was arrested and is currently in jail now. He apparently was caught robbing my neighbor's garage. Good riddance. I used to live in Las Vegas, but I've moved out of state since. Currently, I'm in Washington state. When this took place, I lived right outside of Seattle, maybe an hour and a half away at most, in a smaller city known as Everett, and honestly, it's not as nice a place as it used to be. Washington, for whatever reason, has rather unnecessarily high rent. My family and I were living in a small apartment for nearly $1,500 a month, so you'd expect we'd be living somewhere pretty nice, right? Of course not. The interior itself wasn't bad, but it was very small for the three of us to squeeze into. We made it work, of course, though there were negatives such as sharing a bathroom, but it wasn't nearly as bad as having the entirety of the grass hill in front of the apartment door littered with cigarettes and used epidermic needles. By this time, we had a security system installed, including an interior camera, so we had no issues with break-ins. However, my car was constantly being broken into. There wasn't ever really anything to take though. I mean, once they stole sunglasses, and another instance they pried the gas lid open and attempted to funnel gas out. I don't know how well that worked out for them though. Living there was pretty crappy. Our roommate and I even ended up being followed around by some junkie asking for a pipe while grocery shopping across the street from our apartment. The area definitely wasn't ideal. The apartment complex was pretty quiet though. Just be careful outside, I suppose. The neighbors directly above us had quite a few small children, always running around, and their parents spent a lot of time on the balcony, flicking the remains of their cigarettes onto the lawn out front. Obnoxious, but what can you do? Then the neighbors directly next to us, they had a no smoking sign bolted to their door. This was because they were an elderly couple, easily in their 60s or 70s, and the wife was handicapped and constantly hooked to an oxygen tank. Their middle-aged son seemed to live with them as well, and also took part in littering the lawn. I had spoken briefly to them, mainly them warning me about leaving my bike on the balcony, because apparently someone had stolen their wife's £150 mobility scooter after they had briefly left it by their front door. I had seen the son out by himself at night mostly, chain smoking and listening to the Walkman pinned to his side. We made small talk once or twice, while we both happened to be smoking outside, but I didn't make it a habit. He gave off some odd vibes. I ended up enrolling into a trade school, which happened to be out of state in Oregon. Astoria, Oregon, specifically. It was a very small town, only really known for it being the filming area for both the Goonies and Kindergarten Cop. It was roughly 4 hours from Seattle, so I wasn't exactly close to home. The first few weeks went very smoothly. I did, however, end up receiving a call from my mum one night. The police had shown up at her apartment door, demanding the information of our elderly neighbors, but she couldn't help them, of course. We had never been more than friendly with them. We had also noticed that their truck hadn't been parked out front lately. It sort of just seemed to have disappeared. Not much later, an instructor of mine came to class with a newspaper clipping about a missing girl, read the article to us, and moved on. About a week after this, I was out in town with my partner at the time, and I received another call from my mother. She explained to me that the police had showed up again, this time at the neighbor's apartment. Their truck still hadn't returned either. She did, however, end up seeing the elderly man one day after work. Of course, she asked him what was happening, and he explained everything. The missing girl my instructor had brought up before class, his son ended up being responsible for. There was a young girl, either 14 or 15 in California, who their son had been chatting with online. Essentially, he was catfishing her. He portrayed some 18-year-old man as his online persona. Keep in mind that he was nearly in his early 50s. They had been talking for quite some time, and with her teenage angst and all, ended up getting into a fight with her parents, so she decided to pack her things and run away with him. He took his parents' truck out to California and picked her up. She was then held captive in his truck for the next several days. He took the battery out of her cell phone so she couldn't be tracked. They ended up driving from California all the way to Astoria, Oregon. For whatever reason, after he decided he was sick of abusing her, he parked the car at the only McDonald's in town and just left her there. She managed to get out of the car and explained it all to whoever happened to be working at the register. The police were called and her parents immediately drove up to get her. And to add even more salt to the wound, his wife and kids all found out about this via the local news. Turns out, his name is Russell Davini, and he's been charged with kidnapping and assault and coercion. Pretty odd that we ended up in the same small towns, not just once, but twice. I've since completed school, and my family and I have once again moved. So, Davini, let's not meet again. I'm in my early 20s and female. I moved out on my own for the first time about 2 years ago. I haven't had much to do with any of my neighbors, and have always been slightly uneasy to the fact that no one around here is looking out for me. If anything seems off, no one would notice, or do any investigating to make sure I'm alright. Last year, I noticed a man constantly walking his dog in the grass area behind my home. This isn't unusual to see. It is a common area for residents here. His dog is super cute, and my cat liked to play with it through the glass door out back. They would just chase each other back and forth, and put their paws up to the glass and such. Real cute stuff. Well, one day I was outside, and his dog came running up to my porch with glee to get pets and say hi to his kitty friend. This is the first time I actually spoke to this neighbor. We'll call him Mark. So Mark seemed decent enough, and we got along just fine. We started hanging out pretty often in a short time period, because I'm a smoker, and he was letting his dog out all the time. And it was summer, so we ran into each other quite often, and would spend an hour or more after work most days talking. This lasted for a couple of weeks. I gave him my phone number and was happy to have a friend in my complex. I will say he was clearly very interested in either having a romantic relationship with me, or at least being buddies of a sort. He said this quite a lot, not the buddies, but you get what I'm saying. I was very honest with him that I wasn't interested in either at all, and had to tell him this quite often. Frankly, I was getting rather irritated that this came up several times every time we spoke. He rather quickly was trying to get me in his house, from the first time we talked until the last. He offered multiple times every time I saw him. I always said no, and blamed it on me being COVID cautious. He quickly got tired of that excuse and invited himself into my home as well. I always said no. One day, he came out while I was smoking with a bottle of wine and a couple of glasses, saying I had to try this stuff because it's delicious. I instantly noticed that the seal is broken on the screw bottle cap, but didn't seem like anything was drank. The bottle was filled to the brim, which I also thought was a little odd because usually wine isn't filled to the very tippy top like that. So he pours a couple of glasses and doesn't drop a beat in telling me to take a drink. I felt very uncomfortable, but didn't want him to feel like he was being accused of anything when he's just trying to be a nice, friendly neighbor after he poured himself a glass of this very same stuff. Well, my mama raised me better than that, so I totally faked a sip and said it was good. After any sentence either of us said, he would again tell me to take a drink. I told him I don't really drink, so I'm pacing myself, but did say I noticed he hadn't drank any, and to please go ahead. He didn't reach for his glass right away, but in the middle of speaking, he reached for his cup and knocked it over, spilling the wine onto the grass. He brushed it off rather quickly and told me it's my turn to drink now. I said, "But you still haven't drank anything. You spilled your drink. Pour yourself another glass," and that I didn't want to drink alone. So he did. He still didn't drink anything. He did tell me a few moments later to drink mine. I told him that he needs to catch up, and we basically just keep doing that in circles. He reached for his glass again, and guess what? Spilled it again. Wine is all in the grass now. Then he told me to drink. At this point, I'm done. Too many red flags are screaming at me to get the hell out. I'm honest with him that this seemed really sketchy, and I didn't trust the drink because he's refusing to drink any, but is way too eager for me to drink mine. He told me he was just clumsy and taking it slow because he doesn't drink a lot, but he has seen me have friends over taking shots and drinking beers and wine, so he knows I'll handle it better than him. Yet another red flag is raised. So he's been watching me, huh? I think it's important to mention that our complex is huge. He used to work here and knows the maintenance crew, and he doesn't live particularly near to me. He's about half a block away from me and cannot see my windows or yard from where he lives, and has a few different common area yards closer to him that he could use for his dog. So I told him I'm flat out not drinking anything because of how this all seemed. He once again pours himself a glass, and once again spills it. There isn't much left in the bottle at this point. I pour the remaining wine in his glass and tell him to drink with me on 3. We raise our glasses, and to my amazement, he actually takes a drink, and I spilled mine onto the grass. Oops. He comes about 2 nights later while I was smoking, and instantly starts complaining to me that I wouldn't date him or sleep with him, and he doesn't know why all the girls are like this. He starts getting really loud, shouting at me, asking me what the problem with him is, that I won't do these things. I told him that I had been honest with him since I'd met him, that I'm not interested in that, and that it isn't him specifically. I'm just honestly not interested in that from anyone right now. He still shouted at me and started complaining about his ex and her dog. Yeah, her dog. Then proceeded to tell me that he used to abuse the hell out of that dog, and went into detail about how he wouldn't feed or water it because it used the bathroom in the house, and how he would kick it really hard. I'm horrified at this point, especially considering this whole time he's telling me he's playing fetch with his little dog. His dog always seemed scared of him, and I had even pointed that out in the past, and he said that his dog's previous owners were abusive, so he's just very scared and distrusting. The dog was always very excited to see me though, and would cuddle up to me and stay behind me, so I always thought I was extra special. But with that knowledge, I just think the poor guy is currently in an abusive household. I was so done with this guy, I just cut him off and said I needed to go because my friends were waiting on me. He's sent me several messages of gibberish when he's outside. He will just blow my phone up with, "Hey," "Hi," and then a bunch of gibberish. He's texted me telling me that he knows I'm home because he has seen me walking around, or that he sees my car in the lot. He will throw his dog's toys on my porch, I think trying to get my attention to come out because of the cute dog. He will just stand outside my porch for hours. It's all cold and rainy and snowy these days, so it's even creepier. I think in his mind, since I'm a smoker, I'll come out eventually. Silly him though, because I just go out front when I see him out there. He said several things to me before the wine fiasco went down that were red flags. I figured it might be language or cultural difference though, because English is the third language he has learned, and America is the third country he has lived in. I guess moral of the story is to just trust your gut. He still bothers me, and like I said, we only spoke and hung out for a few weeks in summer. My last message from him was last night. He asked me what he had done wrong, and if I felt disrespected in any way, etc. I have not spoken to him since he screamed at me for not sleeping with him, sandwiched with admitting horrible animal abuse. I thought about answering his texts with the brutal truth about how twisted and creepy he presented himself as, and how uncomfortable he made me feel, but I didn't want to give him any ideas on how he should improve. Stay smart, folks. Don't drink things people give you if the seal is broken. He was definitely trying to drug me. I would love to move, since I've become uneasy in my own home environment, but moving is expensive and not something I can afford at the moment. I also do have a stun gun, pepper spray, and a handgun. I am extremely reluctant to ever use a gun on a person, but I do have training on the weapon. I do bring pepper spray with me every time I go outside now, even if it's just to take garbage out or pop in my car for a second. So this happened when I was a teenager, starting about 6 years ago. Ask FM, if you're not aware, is a website and app where you can create a profile and people can ask you anonymous questions. Your answers are published on your page. It became all the rage when I was at school as a teenager, and a lot of people in my year had it, despite us being 16 and 17 and nearly adults. There were a lot of cliches, bitching, bullying, scandal and drama, so you can imagine some of the stuff people are saying on Ask. I decided it would be a laugh to have an account. I got a lot of crap on there. Some of it was pretty mean, but not all of it. I also had a blog for a while, and it suddenly became weirdly popular. My views went from a handful each post to thousands. My blog was linked to my Twitter, which was linked to my Ask, so I started getting people who read my blog asking for advice. This went on for a while, even after I had left school at 18 and started my first job. Around this time, one particular asker caught my attention. He was called Jamie, about 17 years old, who'd read my blog and was going through some stuff. Depression, bullying, abuse from his girlfriend, family didn't seem to care, etc. He didn't want people finding out he was talking about it, as it probably would have made it worse. He never told me such things as location, even vaguely other than England, like me, and didn't want to contact me outside of Ask, which I had suggested thinking it would be more discreet. I only knew his first name and the basic details of what he was up against. I really felt bad for this guy. He felt like he was a nobody and that things would never get better. We spoke often, and though I did my best to cheer him up, I made it clear I was just a teenager with a blog, and though I would listen, I could not do for him what a professional could. I urged him to go and get help for his depression and report his bullies. One day I was on Ask, and something popped through from someone saying they were Jamie's cousin, and that he had confided in them about my blog and Ask. They went on to say Jamie had attempted to hurt himself. He was now in hospital. I was devastated. I know that sounds weird, but after talking to this guy for a while, I felt so emotional about it. I felt like I knew him. I asked Jamie's cousin to let me know if there was any news. Over the next few days, I had 1 or 2 updates. Things were starting to look better. Jamie was awake and asking about moving schools, which his parents were on board with, having taken this situation as a wake-up call. He was looking forward to a fresh start. I was happy for him, though I wished it hadn't had to get to this point for his family to listen to him. But then, a few days later, another update. Jamie had flatlined in the night. He was dead. I sat on the bench outside work, crying my eyes out. I was a mess all day, and ended up having to quietly tell my supervisor what had happened because everyone kept asking if I was okay. I wrote a blog post in tribute to Jamie about the horrendous consequences of bullying. I told his story. On the blog, he had told me that I had made him smile in times of sadness. I mourned the loss of my internet friend. I used Ask less and less. For the next couple of years, I would think about Jamie sometimes. Over time, I realized something did not feel right. I was less naive now, more aware of things in the whole saga that didn't seem to make sense. I started wondering how it was possible for him to suddenly flatline after such improvements in his physical health. The whole cousin thing seemed weird. I hadn't used Ask in ages, but stirred by this creeping sense of suspicion, I decided to log on and read through what remained of the Jamie conversations. I had deleted some of it out of respect for his family. As I scrolled through, I slipped into nostalgia and read a few other conversations I had had on there, including with some serious weirdos. Some claimed to hate me, or to be hopelessly in love with me, sometimes both neither, but all quite unhinged. Some of the questions were about underwear, often socks, with a really creepy sexual undercurrent. A few more normal ones were from guys on how to be more popular, etc. A few from girls on hair, makeup, boys, things like that. There were also some fairly boring, if a little random ones. And then I realized something. Jamie, his cousin, the weirdos, and even some of the seemingly normal or boring but random ones, their manner of typing, the words they used, their rambling, intense, dramatic writing style. It was the exact same, identical. They were the same person. I couldn't believe it. I started reading back further in disbelief. The person, whoever they were, had been sending me Ask messages for literally years. I know it sounds so stupid, but I was terrified. Looking back through, whoever this was had sometimes sent me upwards of 15 questions a day, all seeming at the same time to be unrelated from each other. In some, they claimed to be a lot younger, some older, some female, some male. Some messages were encouraging, even obsessive. Some were mean-spirited and downright harsh. Worryingly, they had asked some questions about things that related to my school that only a student or teacher there would know to reference. My school was pretty small, so this would very likely have been someone I knew and interacted with, at least on an occasional basis. Worse still, it occurred to me that whoever this was had known exactly how to play on my emotions and make a connection, with Jamie in particular. I have some issues from the past regarding bullying, depression, self-harm, and people close to me know how sensitive I am to stuff like that. I had so many emotions running through me: shock, anger, disbelief, fear, paranoia. I had literally grieved James's loss, and to find out that not only he hadn't died, but had never existed, well, it was a lot. I logged into my blog, which I had also not updated for at least a year, and went to delete my Jamie post. That was when I realized someone had commented on it. I read the comment, and from the writing style, I had no doubt that this again was the same person. I can't remember exactly what it said, but it was basically a rant about bullied people needing to toughen up and get a grip. Someone had then replied to it, again with a rant, denouncing this commenter as, quote, horrible, etc. And yep, it was the same person again, bitterly arguing with themselves on a blog post about the character they had created and killed off. I was fully freaking out at this point. If it had just been someone trying to wind me up for a laugh for a bit, sure, I would still have been angry, but this person had committed to this for years, made it so personal. It just felt so sinister. Having read through their questions again, I was struck by how unstable this person came across and how unhealthy their interest in me seemed to be. I went back to ask again, looking for clues to figure out who they were. I noticed a notification bubble on the question icon. Nervous, I clicked on it. I immediately recognized it as them. Bearing in mind, since I had stopped using Ask, I only had maybe 2 random questions from ages ago and a question of the day that the website automatically sends daily, which disappears after a day. This person had clearly seen that my status was active. I don't know whether you can set up notifications for that. To be honest, I hope so. Otherwise, they were just sitting there staring at my profile, waiting for me to log in after a year. The question itself was a short, boring but random one, which was a relief, but still weirded me out. Since then, I have thought of a few people who may be responsible, ranging from close friends to exes, to the family of exes, to former teachers. There's a couple of weird stories there too, to a strange guy I turned down for a date. There are a few who I think it could have been. I will probably never know for sure though, which is infuriating and unnerving. Since they saw me active once, a feature I didn't even realize was there and disabled immediately when I saw it. For a while, I had a couple of questions a day that could have been them that I ignored. It seems to have stopped now, but I will always have a little sick feeling whenever I log on to check, and I will always wonder who I can trust and who I can't. So Jamie, Ask FM Catfish, whoever the hell you are, let's not meet. Or meet again, I don't know.